they've been so diluted now, where it's like you support one thing on the left or one thing on the right, and all automatically you're like a socialist or you're a Nazi. And so it's like, how can we? Do you feel like it's almost too foregone? Do you feel like there's already too much divisive talk in the zeitgeist of our political discourse that it's really hard to offer a unifying message without being laughed at, or not?
I'm optimistic.
It's a hard one, right?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. It's hard. It's going to be very hard. Like that's the truth of it, right? And I
Yeah.
think what's sort of happened is uh, there's this absurd certainty that everyone speaks with now, because if they allow any sort of little nuance in what they're trying to say or what someone else is trying to sort of dialogue with them about, then they have lost their position, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
a bad way of looking at the world and how to interact with people. To me, it looks like insecurity, and um, and I think the complicating factor in all this is reality is a complex phenomenon that we only perceive through a lens of our own experiences, right? So there is a reality, right? And
Yeah.
the whole point of conversation, discussion, debate, and sharing information and sharing notes with each other is to triangulate the shape of that reality, right? Like it's a complex shape, right? I see a triangle, Alex sees a circle, you see a square. And if I only believe the triangle exists, then I don't see the actual shape of what it is. And
Hmm.
to sort of draw the line, this is what it is, and not try to say, okay, what are the commonalities in what we're seeing, and why are those things common, and then draw conclusions from there. Um, I was having a conversation with someone around this in terms of, I think one thing we struggle deeply, deeply with on a society level is this idea that any differences um, between people or anything like that, it's like it's like in a very binary way. But when you look at like sort of social science research, what you end up seeing is like on a normal distribution, the differences within groups are always far greater than any difference between groups, right? And
Yeah.
so, what this means is on the really far edge cases, you might get a distribution that's funky, right? But most of the people are here in the fat center of that distribution, and it doesn't matter the shape of that distribution so much. The concept is right. The median average can be very close, and then the tails can be different. And I think the tails are what get the story, right? Because they're the extreme thing.
Hmm.
And that can really sort of distort our understanding of what's going on. And so it's hard to sort of talk through this, right? Because it's a little bit technical and statistics heavy. But if we just sort of say, hey, you know what? We all want the same things. And when we look at those outcomes, we need to look at what's actually common across all of them that is producing this outcome, right? And once we do
Yeah.
that, then we
Sure.
actually have something tangible to work with and say, hey, these are things we can do. These are steps we can take that don't feel like this existential crisis of we can never do anything about it. And I think right now that's where we're really struggling with right now is we have this um, dialogue where I think people are talking past each other. They want
Hmm. That's a good point.
they want similar things, and they're not talking about the things that they want in common. They're just saying you disagree with me and you're evil for it. It's like that's what children do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's two really key insights there, and yeah, Chris, to kind of I guess crystallize what it seems like you're getting towards, Chris. The first one is Andrew Yang's kind of big platform policy, and that was policy platform, and that was universal basic income. And Unity is not expressly for or against the universal basic income, but there is clearly some association because a lot of the people who came on in the beginning came on in part because Brett had mentioned Andrew Yang as a possible candidate.
Mhm.
And I think that the key insight with the universal basic income is that the issues that divide us, that we think divide us, are not actually the issues that divide us. The actual issues that divide us are that there are more and more people who are food insecure, more and more people who are unable to, pay for their housing, unable to pay for their student debt. And there are all of these complex issues that have risen recently that make us feel like we're on the farther ends of that distribution curve. And if those things were to be addressed explicitly, we would actually come back more into that happy middle, because all of a sudden, if people don't feel insecure about student debt, don't feel insecure about their housing or their food or all of those basic, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those basic needs that we have, then we're actually able to, in a much more real way, come together and talk about our differences over some more high level ideological things. It's like people can't, on that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people can't self-actualize, can't be capable of having that realization that we are in this complex, multi-perspectival reality until they have those base needs addressed. And if they don't have those base needs addressed, they're going to turn to fear, which is what you were speaking to before, Nick. And that fear is kind of the root of the hatred and the anger. And we have to abate that fear at its source, as opposed to trying to just solve the conflict by talking our way out of it.
Yeah. I think one of the issues that exists, I think this is probably the principal problem or challenge we're going to have to overcome, is you have individuals that feel like I can't talk to the other side because they're going to kill me, or they're going to subjugate me, or they're going to deeply oppress me, right? And that happens on both sides, right? You have someone that's on the left. Let's say you're part of the LGBT community, for example. But I can't talk to somebody on the far right, right? They're gonna freaking they're gonna hate me. Or let's say you're black. Like, I can't talk to some person in deep Mississippi that I know is whose grandfather was part of the KKK. They're gonna hate me. And I think perhaps one of the biggest issues that's happened is that because there's so much nuance out there, right? It kind of has to do with between the individual and the group, right? Where, yeah, maybe perhaps as a large group, a lot of individuals of a certain type of demographic might think one way or the other. But that doesn't necessarily mean at the individual level that person's going to act like that, right? You might be really surprised, you might not be, but who knows? And I think the major theme we're kind of coming to a head at is this is really all rooted in fear, right? It's rooted in fear of being rejected, fear of being humiliated, fear of being oppressed, and these are all very valid fears, absolutely, right? But in order to really try and make any progress, we all together have to come together and try and overcome those fears. And that's very hard, right? Like that's not easy, especially as someone that's had those fears validated in the past.